From the shackles of the Treaty of Versailles to the fall of Berlin, the Nazi German tide of aggression was finally brought to an end. In Shanghai, Far East, underground operatives on the covert front transmitted vital intelligence with ingenuity. These dual fronts intertwined, bearing witness to the righteous glory and historical inevitability of the anti-fascist war. On April 30, 1945, within the bunker of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, the muffled echo of Adolf Hitler's suicide pistol faded into the concrete's deathly silence. Meanwhile, in distant Shanghai, China, a middle-aged man in a suit and round-rimmed glasses slipped an encrypted telegram into a cigar box and handed it to a rickshaw driver waiting at the street corner. No one could have imagined that this man of many faces, frequently navigating Japanese puppet institutions and maintaining close ties with triad bosses, was an underground operative embedded deep within enemy territory. Nor did they know that a piece of strategic intelligence he had previously delivered had indirectly influenced the course of the European theater. As Nazi Germany's flag crashed down from the Reichstag in Berlin, and as the hidden battlefronts of the East still simmered beneath the surface, two historical trajectories spanning Eurasia had long been intertwined by the torrent of the anti-fascist war. The origins of it all trace back to a treaty signed at the Palace of Versailles over 2 decades earlier. In the late autumn of 1918, as the guns of Europe fell silent, the Palace of Versailles in Paris hosted negotiations that would shape the world's future. The defeated German delegation, isolated outside the conference hall like lambs awaiting slaughter, awaited the verdict of the victorious powers Britain, France, and the United States. Inside the conference hall, the glow of gilded chandeliers illuminated faces of cold indifference. The victors fiercely debated territorial divisions and war reparations, utterly indifferent to how the fate of the German people would be irrevocably altered. The final Treaty of Versailles, like a heavy chain, bound Germany's hands and feet. 72,000 square kilometers of territory were ceded, equivalent to 13% of Germany's total land area at the time. The left bank of the Rhine was designated a demilitarized zone, and the Sarkol region was placed under French administration. For 15 years, an exorbitant reparations bill of 132 billion gold marks, to be paid over 66 years equivalent to approximately $33 billion in contemporary dollars, far exceeded Germany's economic capacity. Military strength was strictly capped at 100,000 troops, with air forces, tanks and submarines banned, leaving only a minimal navy for coastal defense. On June 28, 1919, German representatives were compelled to sign the treaty. News of this sparked massive protests erupting instantly on Berlin's streets. Hamburg merchant Willy Cohn recorded in his diary, "This is not peace, but a 20-year truce. Every word of this treaty devours Germany's dignity and future." Germany, ravaged by 4 years of war, saw its industrial output plummet to just 59% of pre-war levels. Agricultural yields had drastically declined, and food shortages grew increasingly severe. The treaty's signing further devastated the economy. Factories closed en masse. Unemployed workers flooded the streets, and bread lines stretched for blocks. Amid this chaos and despair, an Austrian veteran began seeking his opportunity in Munich's taverns. He was Adolf Hitler, then merely an ordinary member of the German Workers' Party, yet possessed of a natural gift for inflammatory rhetoric. Hitler keenly sensed the public fury over the Treaty of Versailles, locking on to it like a hunter targeting prey. At Munich's Bergbrau Keller pub, he would often stand atop tables, fist raised, denouncing the treaty's injustice at the top of his lungs. He blamed Germany's plight on specific ethnic groups and the November criminals, the politicians who overthrew the monarchy during the 1918 German Revolution. His speeches spread like a plague, striking precisely at the public's deepest anxiety sphere of unemployment, anxiety over poverty, and resentment at the loss of national dignity. Louise Solmitz, a housewife in Hamburg, recorded the scene in her diary. The tavern was packed, everyone shouting. Hitler's voice cut through the clamor, filling me with both dread and exhilaration, as if I'd found an outlet for all my grievances. Through such infectious oratory, Hitler rapidly amassed a large following. Membership in the German Workers' Party surged from just over 1,000 in 1922 more than 30,000 by 1923. On November 8, 1923, believing the moment ripe for seizing power, Hitler launched the infamous beer hall putsch at the Beigelbergeller. Leading the Sturmabteilung SA, he surrounded the tavern, seized 3 high-ranking Bavarian officials, and forced them to support his rebellion. Yet Hitler's ambitions were swiftly shattered by reality. The next day, as he led the SA toward Munich city center, they were met with armed suppression by the police. The moment gunfire erupted, the SA instantly disintegrated. Hitler fled the scene in panic and was ultimately arrested by the police. This hastily organized uprising ended in failure. During the trial, Hitler transformed the courtroom into his own podium. He passionately defended himself, propagating his extreme ideology and attracting significant media attention. Though he should have faced a severe sentence, he was ultimately sentenced to only 5 years in prison. He was incarcerated in the well-appointed Landsberg prison, where he not only had a private cell but also enjoyed the freedom to receive visitors and write manuscripts. During his 9 months in prison, Hitler dictated and Rudolf Hess transcribed the book Mein Kampf. This work systematically propagated erroneous ideas such as extreme nationalism and expansionism, exerting a detrimental influence on many German citizens. The book explicitly asserted that the Germanic race was a superior race entitled to rule the world, while numerous other ethnic groups were inferior races that should be eliminated. Germany required living space and must expand eastward to conquer the Soviet Union. In December 1924, Hitler was released from prison early, by which time he had become a prominent figure in German politics. Having learned from his mistakes, he abandoned violent methods of seizing power and instead pursued political control through elections and propaganda. Meanwhile, Germany's economy was plunged into an unprecedented hyperinflation crisis. By 1923, the German mark had depreciated to an outrageous extent. In early 1921, $1 could still be exchanged for 64 marks. But by November 1923, $1 could be exchanged for a staggering 4.2 trillion marks. On Berlin streets, people pushed carts laden with bundles of marks to buy daily necessities. The price of 1 kilogram of butter skyrocketed from 100 marks at the start of the year. Historical records indicate that desperate Germans even stuffed mark banknotes into their stoves for warmth, as the currency was worth less than firewood. The savings of the middle class vanished overnight, plunging many families from relative comfort into destitution as social order teetered on collapse. This extreme economic crisis provided fertile ground for Hitler's rise. As historian Michael Wilt described in The Crack Decade, when people can't even afford bread, extreme ideologies grow like weeds. In 1924, under American leadership, the DOS plan was formally implemented, providing Germany with a 20 billion gold mark loan to stabilize its economy and repay reparations. This loan acted as a powerful shot in the arm for Germany's moribund economy. German industry began a gradual recovery, unemployment rates declined, and social order temporarily stabilized. From 1924 to 1929, Germany's industrial output grew at an average annual rate of 8.2%, returning to pre-World War I levels. This period became known as Germany's Golden 5 Years. However, this prosperity was a false boom built on foreign capital inflows. At the time, 75% of Germany's investments came from short-term loans from the United States. Like a house of cards with rotten foundations, it could collapse at any moment. On October 24, 1929, the New York Stock Exchange crashed, triggering a global financial crisis. The United States swiftly halted its loans to Germany, causing the German economy to collapse once again. By 1932, Germany's unemployment rate soared to 30.8%, leaving nearly 6 million workers jobless. Starving and freezing vagrants became a common sight on the streets. Many working families survived solely on government relief payments, which barely covered basic subsistence. In Berlin's train stations, parks, and other public spaces, vast numbers of displaced people erected makeshift tents, forming sprawling unemployed camps. Matthias Joseph Mies, a miner from Westphalia, wrote in his diary, "Every morning, the first thing I do is line up for relief bread. The children cry from hunger, my wife weeps all day long, and I have no idea how much longer this can go on." Public discontent with the Weimar government reached its peak, and its approval ratings plummeted. In the July 1930 two Reichstag elections, the Nazi Party secured 37.4% of the vote, becoming the largest party in parliament. On January 30, 1933, under pressure from various factions, German President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor. The shadow of Nazism now officially loomed over all of Europe. After assuming power, Hitler swiftly consolidated his dictatorship through iron-fisted measures. On February 27, 1933, the Reichstag in Berlin was engulfed in a sudden fire. Hitler immediately blamed opposition forces, declaring it a signal for revolution. Seizing this opportunity, he enacted the Enabling Act, suspending fundamental constitutional rights such as freedom of speech and assembly. He then launched a massive crackdown, arresting and suppressing dissenters. Statistics indicate that in 1933 alone, over 100,000 opponents of Hitler's regime were arrested, many imprisoned in concentration camps where they endured inhumane torture. Simultaneously, Hitler vigorously implemented a policy of totalitarianism, bringing government, military, education, culture, and all other spheres under the control of his ruling system, enforcing cultural dictatorship. He banned all books, newspapers, and artistic works critical of his regime, ordering the burning of vast quantities of literature deemed incompatible with his ideology, including works by renowned scholars such as Einstein and Freud. To win public support, Hitler vigorously promoted social welfare programs while secretly expanding military armaments. He championed the slogan "Guns over butter," channeling massive funds into the military-industrial complex. From 1933 to 1939, Germany's military expenditures soared from 3.4 billion marks annually to 30 billion marks, rising from 3.2% to 17.2% of the gross national product. Driven by this military build-up, Germany's unemployment rate plummeted, falling to 1.3% by 1938 and achieving near full employment. The authorities also vigorously constructed infrastructure such as highways and airports, creating numerous jobs. Simultaneously, he implemented a series of social welfare policies, providing workers with housing subsidies, health insurance, and other benefits, which won him widespread public support. However, all of this was built on the foundation of overextending the national finances and preparing for foreign aggression. In 1935, Hitler openly violated the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles by expanding the Wehrmacht to 300,000 troops. On March 7, 1936, he ordered 30,000 German troops to march into the demilitarized Rhine zone, tearing up the Locarno Pact. In response to Hitler's aggressive actions, Britain, France, and other nations adopted a policy of appeasement, offering only verbal protests without implementing any substantive sanctions. This emboldened Hitler, who perceived the Western powers as weak and easily intimidated, accelerating his pace of aggression. In November 1936, Germany and Japan signed the Anti-Comintern Pact in Berlin, forming a political and military alliance. On November 6, 1937, Italy joined the pact, formally establishing the three-power Axis alliance of Germany, Italy, and Japan. On March 11, 1938, with the cooperation of pro-German elements within Austria, Hitler annexed Austria through military coercion. He then turned his sights on Czechoslovakia, demanding the cession of the Sudetenland region. On September 30, 1938, the leaders of Britain, France, Germany, and Italy convened in Munich and signed the Munich Agreement. Without Czechoslovakian representation, they ceded the Sudetenland to Germany. Winston Churchill later angrily described it as a complete, unconditional, and outright surrender. Massive military expansion and aggressive campaigns demanded enormous financial resources. To fill the fiscal void, Hitler turned his sights on a specific ethnic group. On the night of November 9, 1938, under the orchestration of Hitler and Göring, their followers launched nationwide persecution against this group, the infamous Kristallnacht. That night, Jewish-owned shops, synagogues, and residences across Germany were looted and destroyed. Shards of glass glistened in the moonlight, earning the night its name. According to authoritative historical records, during this atrocity, 91 members of the targeted ethnic group were murdered. 26,000 were arrested and imprisoned in concentration camps, and the plunder of their assets yielded approximately 1 to 1.2 billion marks, temporarily alleviating financial pressures. However, this marked only the beginning of the persecution. Subsequently, the regime embarked on an organized, systematic campaign to expel and exterminate the Jewish population. According to the latest authoritative statistics, between 1939 and 1945, approximately 6 million Jews were systematically murdered across Europe, alongside millions of other ethnic groups, bringing the total number of victims to roughly 11 to 12 million, an unspeakable crime against humanity. In March 1939, Hitler reneged on the Munich Agreement and invaded Czechoslovakia, occupying the entire country. Subsequently, he turned his aggressive gaze toward Poland. To avoid fighting on two fronts, Hitler signed the Soviet-German Non-Aggression Pact with the Soviet Union on August 23, 1939. This treaty included a secret protocol for the partition of Poland, delineating spheres of influence between the two nations on Polish territory. At 4:45 a.m. on September 1, 1939, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, initiating a surprise attack on Poland and triggering the full-scale outbreak of World War II. Hitler formed two army groups. The Southern Army Group comprised the 8th, 10th, and 14th Armies, while the Northern Army Group consisted of the 3rd and 4th Armies. In total, 58 divisions, 1.5 million troops, 2,800 tanks, and 2,000 aircraft were deployed. Employing Blitzkrieg tactics, German armored forces concentrated their superior strength under air cover to breach Polish defenses and rapidly advanced deep into the rear. The flat terrain of western Poland provided an ideal battlefield for German mechanized forces. German tank formations sliced through Polish defenses like a sharp blade, advancing dozens of kilometers daily while destroying critical Polish military assets, assembly points, command centers, communication hubs, and railway junctions. Despite fierce resistance, the Polish army's outdated equipment and obsolete tactics proved utterly incapable of halting the German offensive. On September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded and occupied eastern Poland under the secret protocol of the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. Warsaw fell on September 28th, marking Poland's surrender after a mere 36 days of resistance. During this campaign, German forces captured approximately 690,000 Polish soldiers while suffering only 16,000 casualties. France, which had previously pledged its support to Poland, launched only a symbolic offensive along the Franco-German border before withdrawing its forces back home, passively watching as Poland was partitioned between Germany and the Soviet Union. Poland's swift defeat further elevated Hitler's prestige within Germany and reinforced his conviction in the power of Blitzkrieg. The triumph in the Blitzkrieg against Poland fueled Hitler's ambitions. On May 10, 1940, German forces launched an offensive against Western European nations including France, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Germany had previously formulated Plan Yellow, which called for Army Group B to advance through the northern Belgian plains as the main force, drawing the bulk of the Anglo-French forces. However, Hitler was dissatisfied with this plan, deeming it lacking in surprise. At this juncture, General Helmuth von Manstein, Chief of Staff of Army Group A, proposed Operation Sickle, advocating for Army Group A to serve as the main offensive force. This plan involved crossing the Ardennes forest to attack the Sedan region of France, thrusting directly toward the English Channel to encircle the Allied forces from behind. Meanwhile, Army Group B would conduct a feint in the direction of the Netherlands and Belgium, drawing the main Allied forces northward. Initially opposed by senior German commanders who deemed crossing the Ardennes forest with mechanized forces too risky, the plan was ultimately adopted by Hitler after the Allies obtained details of Plan Yellow. On May 10, 1940, the German offensive commenced. Army Group B on the northern flank rapidly breached Dutch and Belgian defenses. The Netherlands surrendered after only 5 days of resistance. British and French forces hastily dispatched their main units to reinforce Belgium, unaware they had fallen into the German trap. Meanwhile, the main German force, Army Group A, advanced secretly through the Ardennes forest, an area the Allies deemed an impenetrable natural barrier and defended only by a small contingent. On May 12th, Guderian's 19th Panzer Army and Rommel's 7th Panzer Division launched a surprise attack from the Ardennes, swiftly breaching French defenses and advancing towards Sedan. On May 14th, German forces forcibly crossed the Meuse River. British and French forces urgently dispatched fighter aircraft for reinforcement, leading to the fiercest aerial battle of the war thus far over the Meuse, involving over 1,000 aircraft. Under the intense German ground-to-air fire, British and French aircraft suffered heavy losses, with 147 fighters destroyed in a single day. The Meuse River defense line was completely breached. Following the collapse of the Meuse line, German armored forces advanced like a runaway horse toward the English Channel. By May 20th, Guderian's armored corps reached the coast, trapping the main Allied forces in the Dunkirk area. At this critical juncture, Hitler abruptly ordered a halt to the advance, a decision that remains one of World War II's enduring mysteries. The prevailing view among historians suggests Hitler halted the advance for several reasons. First, Air Marshal Göring assured him the Air Force alone could annihilate the Allied forces at Dunkirk. Second, Hitler was eager to push southward to capture all of France and did not want the armored forces to waste time at Dunkirk. And third, He feared that overextending the armored units would invite counterattacks from the Allies, leading to unnecessary losses. This delay provided the Allies with precious time to retreat. On May 26, 1940, the Allies launched Operation Dynamo, initiating the evacuation from Dunkirk. Over the next 9 days, Britain mobilized 861 vessels of all types including warships, merchant ships, fishing boats, and even private yachts to evacuate approximately 338,000 Allied soldiers from Dunkirk. Although the Allies abandoned vast quantities of weapons and equipment, this evacuation preserved British fighting strength, laying the groundwork for future counteroffensives. After the Dunkirk evacuation concluded, German forces concentrated their efforts on advancing southward into France. On June 14th, German troops occupied Paris. On June 22nd, the French government formally surrendered. Under the terms of surrender, France was divided into 2 zones. The northern part was directly occupied by German forces, while the southern region established the German-controlled Vichy puppet regime. At the surrender ceremony, Hitler specifically ordered the carriage from the 1918 German train where World War I surrender documents were signed to be brought forth, choosing to accept France's capitulation within it to avenge the humiliation of the previous defeat. After occupying France, Hitler attempted to negotiate peace with Britain, but British Prime Minister Winston Churchill resolutely rejected his appeal for peace in a speech to Parliament. Churchill declared, "We shall fight on in France, we shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight ever more boldly and ever more strongly in the air, and we shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be." To force Britain's surrender, Hitler ordered the development of Operation Sea Lion, a plan to invade Britain by destroying the Royal Air Force, seize air superiority, and pave the way for amphibious landings. On August 12, 1940, German forces launched massive air raids against Britain, an event known as the Battle of Britain. Initially, German air raids targeted key military facilities such as airfields, radar stations, and aircraft factories. The Royal Air Force faced immense pressure, with multiple airfield runways destroyed and significant losses of aircraft. However, Britain possessed an advanced radar warning system that enabled it to anticipate the direction of German attacks in advance, allowing for concentrated interception efforts. Simultaneously, the British public demonstrated remarkable resilience, with many civilians joining the Air Raid Protection Corps to assist the military in air. On August 24th, several German aircraft mistakenly bombed London's city centre. Churchill immediately ordered retaliatory bombing of Berlin. Enraged, Hitler ordered air raids to target British cities like London, aiming to crush the public's will to resist. This decision granted the Royal Air Force a crucial respite to repair airfields and replenish aircraft. Over the next 2 months, German forces launched massive bombing campaigns against London, inflicting heavy casualties and property damage. Yet the British people's resolve remained unbroken. Ultimately, the Germans failed to destroy the RAF and could not launch an amphibious invasion. On September 17, 1940, Hitler shelved Operation Sea Lion and shifted his strategic focus eastward toward the Soviet Union. On December 18, 1940, Hitler signed Führer Directive No. 21, naming the invasion plan Operation Barbarossa. He arrogantly declared, "The Soviet Union is like a shack, it can be kicked down with a single blow." At 3:30 a.m. on June 22, 1941, the German forces, amassing approximately 5.5 million troops equipped with about 3,700 tanks, 7,100 artillery pieces, and 2,700 aircraft, launched a surprise attack against the Soviet Union, divided into 3 army groups: northern, central, and southern. They advanced along an 1,800-kilometer front stretching from Murmansk in the north to the south at the Black Sea. In the initial stages of the war, the Soviet forces were completely unprepared and suffered heavy losses. Leveraging their superior mobility, German armored units rapidly breached Soviet defenses and advanced deep into Soviet territory. Within half a month, German forces had pushed forward hundreds of kilometers, occupying vast swaths of land and encircling and annihilating millions of Soviet soldiers. On September 30, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Typhoon, ordering Army Group Center to concentrate approximately 1.8 million troops and 1,700 tanks to attack the Soviet capital, Moscow. By October 15th, the intensity of the German offensive forced the evacuation of some Soviet government agencies and diplomatic missions from Moscow, with many citizens also beginning to flee. Yet Stalin chose to remain in Moscow, standing with the people to resist the German advance. On November 7th, the anniversary of the October Revolution, Stalin presided over a grand military parade on Red Square. The troops marching in the parade were immediately dispatched to the front lines. Stalin's action greatly boosted the morale of Soviet soldiers and civilians. Nevertheless, the German advance remained relentless. By early December, German vanguard units had reached the outskirts of Moscow, just 20 kilometers from the Kremlin. At this critical moment when Moscow seemed on the verge of falling, the harsh Soviet winter set in. By early December 1941, temperatures in Moscow plummeted below -30 degrees Celsius, with lows reaching -40 degrees Celsius. German soldiers, lacking adequate winter gear, suffered severe frostbite. Many lost fingers and toes. Equipment like tanks and artillery malfunctioned due to the extreme cold. Fuel solidified, rendering engines inoperable. German combat effectiveness plummeted, and their advance stalled. Meanwhile, the Soviet forces had long adapted to the bitter cold and were well equipped for winter warfare. They began organizing a counteroffensive. On December 5, 1941, the Red Army launched a massive counterattack, forcing the Germans into a series of retreats. During this counteroffensive, Soviet troops annihilated over 300,000 German soldiers, destroyed more than 1,500 tanks, and captured over 2,000 artillery pieces. The German forces were forced to retreat 100 to 250 kilometers, marking the complete collapse of the Blitzkrieg strategy. The European theater shifted into a protracted war of attrition. By June 1942, having suffered heavy losses on the Soviet front, the German army was unable to launch a full-scale offensive. Instead, it adopted a strategy of focused attacks. Targeting the Caucasus region and Stalingrad in the Soviet Union, Hitler sought to capture Stalingrad to sever supply lines along the Volga River and seize control of the Caucasus oil fields, aiming to crush the Soviet Union both economically and militarily. On July 17, 1942, German forces launched their assault on Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad stands as one of the bloodiest engagements of World War II. Both sides engaged in brutal urban warfare, with every street, building, and even individual house becoming a contested stronghold. Despite occupying 90% of Stalingrad at one point due to their numerical superiority, the Germans could not dislodge the Soviet defenders who tenaciously held a small strip of land along the Volga River, refusing to retreat an inch. During the Battle of Stalingrad, Soviet soldiers demonstrated extraordinary tenacity. A sniper named Vasily Zaitsev killed 225 German soldiers during the battle, becoming a hero of the Red Army. Casualties were devastating on both sides. By late October 1942, combined losses exceeded 1 million. On November 19th, the Soviet Red Army launched Operation Uranus. Under Marshal Zhukov's command, 3 fronts executed a surprise flanking assault, rapidly breaching German defenses and encircling the German Sixth Army. Approximately 250,000 encircled German troops found themselves trapped, facing a dire shortage of ammunition and supplies. Hitler issued strict orders for the Sixth Army to hold its positions and forbid retreat. He commanded Field Marshal Manstein to lead reinforcements to break the siege. But these reinforcements were met with fierce resistance from Soviet forces and could not advance. On February 2, 1943, Field Marshal Paulus, commander of the German Sixth Army, surrendered his forces. Approximately 91,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner. The devastating defeat at Stalingrad severely weakened the German forces, causing them to lose strategic initiative on the Soviet front. In July 1943, seeking to regain strategic initiative, Hitler ordered Field Marshal Manstein to formulate Operation Citadel. This plan aimed to launch a pincer attack from both north and south against Soviet forces in the Kursk salient, seeking to annihilate their combat strength. By this time, the Allies had cracked the German military code, and the details of Operation Citadel were known to the Soviets. The Soviet Union swiftly constructed multiple layers of fortified defenses in the Kursk region, mobilizing approximately 1.91 million troops, 5,128 tanks, 25,000 artillery pieces, and 2,792 aircraft, ensuring thorough combat preparations. In the early hours of July 5, 1943, German forces launched the initial assault on Soviet defenses at Kursk, igniting the largest tank battle in human warfare history. During the Battle of Kursk, nearly 8,000 tanks were deployed by both sides. German Tiger tanks, with their heavy armor and formidable firepower, exerted immense pressure on Soviet tank units, while the Soviet T-34 tanks, leveraging their agile maneuverability and numerical superiority, engaged in fierce combat against the Germans. On the battlefield, the roar of tanks, the explosions of artillery, and the shouts of soldiers intertwined, creating a scene of extreme ferocity. After over a month of fighting, the Battle of Kursk concluded on August 23, 1943, with a Soviet victory. In this campaign, the Germans suffered losses of approximately 500,000 personnel, 1,500 tanks, 3,000 artillery pieces, and 1,000 aircraft. Their elite forces were largely annihilated, leaving them incapable of launching large-scale offensives thereafter and forcing them to shift to strategic defense. Seizing the momentum, the Soviet Red Army launched a comprehensive strategic counteroffensive, gradually driving the Germans out of Soviet territory. At dawn on June 6, 1944, Allied forces led by the United States and Britain assembled approximately 2.88 million soldiers, 6,939 warships, and 11,590 aircraft. They crossed the English Channel and landed in Normandy, France, opening the second European theater of war. The Normandy landings constituted the largest amphibious operation of World War II. The Allies conducted meticulous preparations and executed a series of deception campaigns, successfully misleading the Germans into believing the invasion would occur at Calais. On D-Day, Allied forces successfully landed on 5 beachheads in Normandy. Despite fierce German resistance, they ultimately secured the landing zones. Subsequently, the Allies advanced into France, forming a pincer movement with the Soviet Red Army against German forces. Germany found itself trapped in a desperate situation of fighting on 2 fronts. On August 25, 1944, Paris was liberated by the Allies, greatly bolstering the morale of France's anti-German resistance. In December 1944, seeking to reverse the unfavorable situation on the Western Front, Hitler launched a massive counteroffensive in the Ardennes region, the last large-scale German offensive of World War II. Hitler assembled approximately 600,000 troops, over 900 tanks, more than 800 aircraft, and 2,600 artillery pieces. His objective was to breach Allied defenses, capture the port of Antwerp, sever Allied supply lines, and split the Allied forces in 2. In the early stages of the battle, the German forces rapidly breached the American defenses due to Allied unpreparedness, forming a salient approximately 100 kilometers wide and 30 to 50 kilometers deep, advancing directly toward Bastogne, the transportation hub of the Ardennes region. Faced with this sudden assault, Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, Dwight D. Eisenhower decisively transferred command of 2 army groups from the isolated U.S. 12th Army Group north of the Ardennes to British General Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group. Simultaneously, he urgently deployed massive reinforcements to halt the German advance while actively preparing counteroffensive operations. By December 24, 1944, Allied forces had committed 24 divisions totaling approximately 600,000 troops. The vastly superior Anglo-American air forces played a pivotal role, conducting massive bombing raids on German supply lines and positions. On January 16, 1945, the Allies launched a full-scale counteroffensive, completely halting the German offensive. During the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans suffered losses of approximately 120,000 troops, 600 tanks, and 1,600 aircraft, depleting their last elite forces with no reserves left for reinforcement. 4 months later, Nazi Germany surrendered. In April 1945, the Soviet Red Army assembled 3 fronts totaling approximately 2.5 million troops, 42,000 artillery pieces, 6,250 tanks and self-propelled guns, and 7,500 combat aircraft for the final assault on Berlin. At this juncture, German forces deployed 2 army groups in the Berlin area, totaling approximately 1 million troops, 10,400 artillery pieces, 1,500 tanks, and 3,300 combat aircraft. Additionally, 200,000 garrison troops were stationed within the city itself. However, the majority of these German defenders were national assault troops composed of elderly men and youths lacking combat experience, rendering their combat effectiveness extremely weak. At precisely 5 a.m. on April 16th, Marshal Zhukov issued the order for the general assault. The 1st Belarusian Front broke through the Germans' first defensive zone and reached the second defensive line by noon that day. However, in the struggle for the Zolotov Heights, dubbed the Berlin Key, the Soviet forces encountered fierce German resistance and found themselves locked in a prolonged stalemate. Stalin personally issued a military directive demanding the position be captured by the evening of the 17th. Zhukov dispatched the valiant commander Terikov to personally lead the 8th Guards Army in a fierce assault. Ultimately, on the 17th, they painstakingly seized the Zolotov Heights. The Soviet forces then committed all their tank corps to the battle. By the morning of April 20th, the vanguard of the First Belarusian Front reached the outskirts of Berlin and began shelling the city center. Meanwhile, Marshal Konev's First Ukrainian Front, advancing from the south, broke through into the southern suburbs of Berlin during the night of April 20th. On April 24th, the left flank of the First Belarusian Front linked up with the First Ukrainian Front southeast of Berlin, severing the German 9th Army's connection to the capital. On April 25th, units of the First Belarusian Front advancing northward around Berlin joined forces with the First Ukrainian Front's 4th Tank Army west of the city, completing the encirclement. On the same day, the Guards' 5th Army of the Ukrainian Front advanced westward to the Elbe River, linking up with the U.S. 1st Army on the Western Front at the Torgau Heights, the first meeting between Soviet and Allied forces during World War II. On April 27th, Soviet troops entered Berlin's city center, engaging in fierce street fighting with German forces. By April 28th, Soviet units had advanced to the Tiergarten district, where the Chancellery, Reichstag, and High Command headquarters were located. At 3:30 p.m. on April 30th, Hitler and his wife Eva Braun took their own lives in an underground bunker. Their remains were subsequently disposed of by subordinates according to their final wishes. At 6 p.m., Soviet troops launched an assault on the Reichstag building. After fierce fighting, they gained full control of the Reichstag on May 2nd, and the Berlin garrison surrendered. On May 8, 1945, Germany formally signed the unconditional surrender, marking the end of the anti-fascist war in Europe.